University Club in Crawley on the campus of University of Western Australia. And we've got Heavy Rare Earths Limited here with us today. ASX code is HRE. Richard Brescianini is the man that's going to be talking to us. Market cap about 5 mil. Presently the shares around 8.5 cents. Heavy Rare Earth is all about rare earths in Esperance, and their project is called Cowalinya. I'm glad I got that out. So, Richard, welcome back to Coffee with Samso. Your mineral resource is the main topic today. So, tell us about it.
Well, it was just early this week, Noel. I think we came out of a trading hold on Tuesday morning, having received results very late the previous week. We've upgraded, had a substantial, very, very substantial upgrade in mineral resources there, and I've got to say it exceeded my expectations. So I was very pleased about that. I'm very happy with the work the resource consultant has done on that. We're now sitting at 158, 159 million, nearly 160 million tonnes, easier to remember that way, nearly 160 million tonnes at 870 parts per million total rare earth oxide. That's a substantial increase on our previous resource estimate when we came to market back in August 2022, which was 28 million tonnes at 625. So we've seen a very substantial increase in both tonnes. As you'd expect, we've now drilled around 19% of our land position. Previously we drilled about 2, I think. And we've seen an increase in grade from 625 up to 870. We have increased our cut-off grade from 300 parts per million minus total rare earths to 400 parts per million minus total rare earths. And if we kept it at 300, you know, we'd seen even larger tonnage of resources than what we've put out there as our headline. So yeah, nearly 160 million tonnes at 870 is a super result as far as I'm concerned. And I can confidently say that the remainder of the tenement is likely to host substantial more resources. But we're going to have to wait for some guidance on that, which is probably going to be next week or something like that, around the exploration target. So yeah, that's to come. But yeah, I'm pretty confident that we're seeing our land position host a substantial resource base, which could be the potential foundation for a rare earth development in the region.
It's interesting you had such a substantial increase in the resource, the tonnage side, but the grade also went up.
Yep.
Which is doesn't happen all the time.
Rarely, I think, is the term you might be looking for there. And that's why, that was one of the reasons why I was just so chuffed with the whole thing, is that I was expecting a great increase on the basis of the assays that we were putting out over the December through to May period. I could see there were a lot of big intercepts of much higher grade than our average resource grade at that time. So I was always confident we were going to see an increase. I just didn't know how much it was going to be. I had a few numbers kicking about in my head, but this was better than I thought. And again, we could up our cut-off grade to 500 parts per million total rare earths minus cerium and still have a head grade of over 1,000 ppm. But we chose to run with the 400 at this point in time. I'll keep any further upgrades in reserve. And hell, if in the future I need to show an even greater tonnage, we might pull the cut-off grade back. But just a small discussion on cut-off grade, if that's okay. At our resource, and people can read it in the very comprehensive statement that we made to the market on Tuesday, in our resource there's a natural mineralisation cut-off, which is at around 300 parts per million total rare earths. Not total rare earths minus cerium, total rare earths. So our cut-off grade is going to be somewhere above that, ultimately, okay? And we've chosen a TREO minus cerium. Why? Because cerium is pretty much worthless. Whatever we sell at the end of this, should we be fortunate enough to get to a development, we'll be pricing the cerium content as 0. So it's, in my view, appropriate to net that off as part of your cut-off grade.
So most of it, to interrupt you, most of the TREO quoted in the marketplace includes cerium.
Correct.
Okay.
It always includes cerium.
Okay.
Our cut-off grade, and of course our head grade of 870 parts per million includes cerium. Cerium might occupy, I don't know the exact percentage, it's in the market announcement, certainly investors can go and see that. Cerium might occupy 20% of our mix, might be a little higher than that, I can't remember what the number is, might be 25% of our mix. We net that off in the cut-off, okay? Recognising that we're not going to be able to sell that cerium. We won't make any money, so what's the point of putting it in the cut-off? We net that off. So there's a few of us doing that, but not many. But that's not to say that that cut-off grade represents an economic cut-off. We don't know what the economic cut-off is yet, and we won't know that for some time until we have our metallurgy under control and all the other costs that are associated with putting a development together. Only then do you really begin to sort out what your economic cut-off is. But having said all that, we have a natural mineralisation cut-off, about 300 ppm total rare earths. We've chosen to use a 400 minus TREO minus cerium as our cut-off grade. We could have gone higher to have a higher head grade of above 1000 ppm total rare earths. We chose not to do that. But we reserve the right to do that in the future, should it make sense to do that, to up our cut-off grade further. At 160 odd million tonnes at 870 parts per million, that's a really good result. And what investors really need to understand is no matter what that number is sitting in the ground, that's not the number that the plant's going to see. The plant's going to see, in our case anyway, on the information that we have to date, the plant's going to see about double that grade, because that's what our upgrade is when we begin to look at just the fine fraction, the sub 25 micron fraction, which we've already demonstrated hosts 80-90% of our rare earths. So that's what we're going to be looking to put to the plant, ultimately, post screening, to go into acid leach. That's the grade that investors really need to focus on. So it's essentially double of what we've got as our head grade in this mineral resource. So we're probably looking at something closer to 1700 parts per million that the plant will see.
I think that's very important to state, because a lot of people will look at this and say, oh, they only got the 800, but everyone's quoting 1400 and 1200. But the reason is, at the end of the day, once the flow sheet, which we'll discuss a bit later, comes into play, everything's different numbers, right? But as you're talking, I'm thinking, you've gone out to drill 19% of your land holding, and you've got this tonnage, and your grade's gone up. Interestingly, I think that's very important to stress here, is that, and you make the point, it's very rare, because you must have hit some sweet spots in there to get that grade up, and those sweet spots must have been pretty big numbers to get that number to where you have. Is that consistent? Do you think, or do you see, or do you know whether that's geology is consistent, or you may find more of that in your other parts of your tenement?
Well, I would expect so, on the basis of drilling that we've done up to 14 kilometres away from our resource. So we see some good numbers up there, and again, investors can reacquaint themselves with I think it was around a 1st of May announcement we put out there, where we reported on some of those far field drilling traverses. And we've got some good grades in there. Good widths, good grades, and perhaps even a bit shallower than our current resource, which is sitting below 15 odd metres, I think, from memory, of overburden on average, although it does come close to the surface in some places. You asked a question around how consistent it's going to be. The geology is very consistent, absolutely. The saprolite's very consistent. The grade does kick around a bit. There's no question about that. And investors...
As they would.
Yeah, as they would. I mean, that's geology, right? And remember, we've drilled a hole every 200 metres along lines at a space 400 metres apart. So we've based our resource on quite a large grid-based program, okay? We haven't gone out and drilled a line here and 10 kilometres away drilled a line there and started to declare resources. No, we've gone in where we've got sufficient confidence that when we drill a line here and there's another line 400 metres away, and with holes every 200 metres apart, we see grade continuity. That's what we're out there trying to do. So that's what we've put out there. We think it's very, very credible to do it that way. Will we go and do that on the rest of our land position? We've got 80% of it left. We'd probably send ourselves bankrupt if we tried to do it that way. So I think when we do come to drill next time, and we're not planning on doing that immediately by no stretch of the imagination, we might do some other work in advance of that to try and zero in on the areas that we would like to drill first. And a reminder for investors, we went out and drilled quite a large 14,500 metre program, starting from where our previous resources were. So we had a bit of a head start to, okay, where do we want to focus? Well, the best place to focus is closest to your nearest resources, okay? So that's what we did, and then used other data to expand the drill program as we were going along. The other data being DTM data and some airborne geophysics that we had from previous explorers. That was also a good guide for us. So we'll be aiming to make use of those and other data sets in the future to start expanding some of those other areas that we've drilled on single lines far from our resource, up to 14 kilometres away, to see if we can zero in on areas where we would again put drill patterns in, which gives you the most confidence in resources. And I might add, we're still only at the inferred stage, and that's despite drilling a hole every 200 metres along the line and 400 metres distant on the next line, okay? And the variography begins to dictate what classification the resource consultant is going to place on it. I'm comfortable that inferred is where it sits today. To be honest, I was thinking there might be a little bit of indicated in there, but I'm very comfortable with the inferred classification on our resources.
In your announcement, I noticed in Figure 2 you talk about the TREO grade thickness.
Yep.
And I think the following diagram, it talks about the grade tonnage curve.
Yep.
Can you just run through that so that we can get a clear understanding of what you're trying to say in those diagrams?
Of course. With the grade thickness, investors will have looked through the report from the resource consultant, and I quoted most of that in the announcement. Most of the announcement are his words, not mine. I think it's very important to get investors to understand that's from an independent source. They'll notice that that the mineralisation is defined in 3 layers: an upper, middle, and lower, where most of the tonnes are sitting in the lower. And quite a bit of the grade is sitting in the lower as well. So to start to try and get a picture of what the resource looks like in a plan view, you can perhaps draw at a particular layer or at a particular reduced level through it and sort of just quote grades, but it's sort of ups and downs a little bit. So we thought about how we would display this in plan view, and we came up with grade thickness, so that we look at every cell, okay, every block, do a grade all the way down to the basement surface, look at the thickness all the way down, and then just do a simple product of your grade and thickness. And that's going to give you some indication of bias towards your thicker saprolite horizons that are mineralised. Well, there's nothing wrong with that, because you want them nice and thick. Right? Clearly you want them nice and thick. You don't want very thin things, 2 or 3 metres. You want something that's 10, 15 metres thick that you're going to go out and mine. So I certainly was, again, very comfortable in displaying information with a thickness bias to it. And that's what we're showing in Figure 2, is where is it that the mineralisation has best grade and is thickest. They're the red zones. And then we kind of go down into the cooler colours. So it shows just how extensive it is and how reasonably continuous it is with a mining perspective in mind, because you just don't want a dot there and a dot there. That's not going to work. This is going to be, if we ever get there, of course, a continuous mining operation, right? It's not going to be something like we see in a single pit. This is going to be a continuous mining operation. Think in terms of bauxite, coal, manganese, those types of developments. So that's the reason why we chose a grade thickness to be able to display information in a plan view. And we've also put a table towards the back, just ahead of JORC Table 1, that has many of the best grade thickness intercepts above 10,000 parts per million metres. Parts per million being the concentration, grade, and metres being the thickness. So that's why we've done that. The grade tonnage curve, of course, is a fairly normal way of showing how does your resource change when you're using different cut-off grades. And we know that everyone's not used to looking at those particular that particular way of looking at data, that they may not be technically minded. So we put the table to accompany it so that it was very, very clear that, of course, as we up our grade cutoff, we'll reduce our tonnes and increase our grade. I think that kind of makes sense to people, and the vice versa. So people can begin to see, okay, you know, they might have a head grade of 870 parts per million, but once they up the cutoff grade to 500 parts per million minus cerium, you know, suddenly their grade's above 1,000 ppm, and there's still 93 million tonnes of it. So we're still looking at very, very large tonnages at high cutoff grade. So there's probably not much more to say about the grade tonnage curve. It looks pretty normal to me, what I'd expect out of something like this. And we were looking to choose a grade cutoff that was in the linear part of the graph, where it's not falling away very substantially on that long grade tail, okay? So it needs to make sense both in a mining perspective. What would you expect to see as a grade cutoff? You know, you wouldn't expect to see 200 parts per million. You'd expect to see something higher than that. And I might add, at 400 parts per million total rare earths minus cerium, if you convert that to a TREO cutoff grade, you're probably looking at somewhere around the 550, 575 parts per million total rare earth cutoff grade, okay? As an equivalence, so that people can then start to compare across different resources, some of which use TREO minus cerium, some of which use TREO as a cutoff grade. Maybe up ours by about 150 ppm to get an equivalence.
In terms of your grade, I'm not sure if you touched on it in some ways, but where do you see more consistency in the grade? Is it at a higher grade? Is there a particular sweet spot grade that you if you were to able to draw a line, say this is where anywhere you go, you drill a hole, you're going to get that grade? Is there such a thing in where you guys are?
I guess we're always looking for that, and the larger the area that covers, the better. Higher grade, larger areas as an initial mining area. Of course, we're looking for that. Do we see that right now? Well, I think if you look at that grade tonnage plan view, that red-orange area in what we call the Western Zone, we're not going to be using that term anymore. It's basically just a big continuous mineralised area. That's probably where it looks best at this point. Having said that, we have drilling 14 kilometres away that could look very much like that area with more drilling. That remains to be seen. We'll have to go out there and drill in a grid pattern around some of those other areas. You know, what I'm seeing, what I'm beginning to see is a north-west-southeast zone running up through the middle part of the tenement. So starting down in that southeast and going up towards those far northwestern whole of lines where we've got some really good grade material, and there's a general drop-off or a general levelling out in the DTM that we sort of see in that area. So what that all means, I guess we'll find out. We've got a lot of drilling to do to try and determine whether there is indeed a continuous zone right up through the middle of the tenement in a northwest-southeasterly direction. Let's see what happens in the future. We'll have to see if the drill's going to turn and be able to give us more answers in that area.
Okay. Your met flow sheet.
Yes. How are things going there?
Yeah.
Well, there's two areas that we're working on presently. The first area is a broader scale leaching program. So investors may recall that we had a 13 composite sample program, of which 8 of the 13 came back with results both in recovery of rare earths, high recovery of rare earths on the revenue side of the business, and low acid consumption on the cost side of the business. And when both of those work, we have what we would consider to be plant feed, potential plant feed. And the other 5 samples either showed one or the other. We don't consider that to be plant feed. We need to do more work to understand why we're seeing one and not the other. Either high acid consumption and high rare earths, not good, or low rare earth recovery, high acid consumption, no good. We need both to be working for us. So that was a 13 sample program. We're now expanding that to about 65 samples across the resource area. And now that we know where our resource is, I've just refined the choice of those samples to go to the metallurgical lab. We've just had those composites, they're all 6 metre composites. We've just had them assayed, so we've got the head assays for them. So I can now collect those samples, bring them around to strategic metallurgy, and they can commence their broader scale leach program on those to understand just how variable our treatment conditions are for our material. So that's just starting now with the head assays done. But in addition to that, at the same time, we're also taking some of our plant feed material from that first program, from the 13 sample first program. We've done a composite of 2 of those, so a much larger composite. Can't remember exactly how much, might be 2 or 3 kilos of material. And the metallurgists have done their sizing on that, and now they are in, and they've completed their leach, their acid leach on that, and they're into the impurity removal step. So I don't have any results to share with anyone. That will continue on, and the whole aim of that is to produce some mixed rare earth carbonate at the end, which of course requires an impurity removal step and then precipitation to be able to produce a mixed rare earth carbonate. And the idea around that is to get samples and place it in the hands of potential customers or refiners as necessary, so that we can begin to qualify the sample that we can produce out of mineralisation sitting in the ground at Cowalinya. So nothing theoretical about it. It comes from the ground. We produce final product. We expect that to be at the specifications necessary for refining, and we'll place that in the hands of refiners, customers around the world to, I guess, put us on the map in their eyes as a potential producer of rare earths at some point in the future. And who knows, those people might decide, well, they're very early stage HRE, which is the truth, and they're at a very low price. It may be worth our while making investment in HRE and join them in the journey towards production. And by doing that, of course, they get to know a lot more about us, and perhaps in the end they may be a preferred customer of HRE in the sale of product.
Yeah, I mean that's an interesting thought, because I mean you and I were at a talk a few weeks ago, and I think that was clearly stated out. I mean that's probably the best way to get your product to market, and I think that's a good strategy.
I think at that particular presentation, Dudley Kingsnorth, the chairman of AR3, or I think now the ex-chairman of AR3, he's just dropping back to a non-exec position. He stated how, and he's got a lot of experience in the industry and he's very well connected downstream. He stated, which I agree 100% with, putting product into the hands of customers really begins to build credibility in what you're doing. Okay, up until that point in time, sure, you've got material on the ground, sure, you're doing some metallurgy and so on, but until you produce something that they can use, that they can buy, and you actually give it to them, they can test it through either their refiners or however they're going to do it, and know that it meets their specification, you're kind of just, what are you really doing? I mean, that's really what you're trying to achieve. So, him saying that at a public forum, for me, provides, great validation for the way in which we're trying to go about engaging customers and refiners of rare earth product.
And I think that's important too, because going down there, you got to differentiate yourself from the rest, and then, and everyone talking about ESG and things. If you can show to them that that's what you do, you're responsible, it gives credibility or branding to your product to some degree. And I think that's the logical way of doing this, I guess, in a new way, or it's the same way as before, but makes complete sense to me.
I think it does. And, showing your ESG credentials is great. I 100% agree with it, but I really would like to not put the cart before the horse. I want to produce something first.
That's right, yeah.
Show evidence for producing something real that people can then begin to take you seriously about.
That they want,
right?
Or they need.
what they need, you know. And we will do that in a very socially and environmentally responsible manner to the extent that we can in the mining industry, okay? So in the resources development sector. So, you know, that is a given, particularly in Australia. It's a given. And of course, it's one of our strong advantages in being able to operate projects in Australia is that the customer should know, maybe they don't always know, that, you know, we will do it at the highest, with the highest standards in mind, okay? Because we have to be able to operate in a first world jurisdiction like Australia.
Look, rare earth has gone off the boil, the whole pricing and everything else, and so has lithium. You know, can you share with us your optimism for that sector?
I can. Well, rare earth prices are actually back on the way up. So yes, it's kind of, and it's not like the bad old days where, you know, the price of NdPr oxide, which is, you know, one of your key products that you'll sell, was down in the doldrums at sub $30 a kilo, you know. It's not back in those dark days because no one's going to make money at those sorts of prices. It's currently sitting at $72, $73 a kilo. It dropped down to around 60 not that long ago. And the reason why it's gone up is largely because of geopolitical issues or political issues around the curtailment of material coming from Myanmar into China, okay? How far is that from what we're doing today? Well, it's just the reality in the rare earths game, you know, for the reasons that they claim, okay? So there's a curtailment of material coming into China, and I say to people, if we're relying on material coming from, as an industry, as a society, of material coming from Myanmar, not to denigrate the people from Myanmar, but, you know, the political environment there isn't exactly where we would like it to be, where probably the people of Myanmar would like it to be. If we're relying on that as being the foundation of the rare earth sector, I think we've got a bit of a problem, okay? So curtailment of that coming across into China for downstream processing has led to the increase of rare earth prices, okay? So usual supply issue has led to increase in prices. That won't last forever, but I think ultimately the more that Western customers, refiners, governments and others begin to look at the industry, they will know that in order to have an ex-China industry, prices need to be stronger than where they are today on a sustainable basis, okay? So I think people will be doing everything they can to try and do that, and I put a proviso on that. The Chinese will allow that to happen to an extent because they don't want to damage their downstream industry inside China, right? By having too high a price, but they also don't want to put their producers out of business by having too low a price. So there's going to be something that's going to give there, but I think there's going to be more pressure being exerted upwards on price because of the situation where a supply-demand dynamic is going to be able to dominate at some point in the future. It's not quite there today, but I think that's where everything's heading. So I'm very, very optimistic about the way in which prices will go. And they don't have to be a hell of a lot higher than where they are today to see things like heavy rare earths and others in the clay-hosted space become a real possibility.
What would that magical number be?
Well, what would the magical number be? Well, I prefer not to dwell on that because I have no control over it. What I prefer to dwell on is keeping our cost base down. Hence the work we're doing in metallurgy and so on. So, you know, the higher the price, obviously the better, you know, we're going to be happier about it. But I'm more focused on bringing our cost base down. Okay?
What's the happy equilibrium? I know as you guys learn more, obviously you're going to push the your cost price down. So we don't want it to be exceptionally high because we all know when it goes too high, it's not sustainable. So what's the happy equilibrium? Do you think that magical figure?
Yeah, I think somewhere in the range of $90 to $100 a kilo for NdPr oxide. I'm talking here, not all the other rare earths. They sort of tend to rise together. And remember, again, a reminder for the investors. You know, NdPr and terbium and dysprosium, TB and DY are the key ones. That's where most of the money is made, and that's what you're going to get paid for. And for the ones that have particularly enriched in terbium and dysprosium, they're really going to cash in on it, because those prices of dysprosium at $350 a kilo, for terbium it's $1,100, $1,200 a kilo. So, the higher the enrichment in those, the better. And I should also add that as well as increasing our grade, our tonnes, and the amount of in situ tonnes of total rare earths, one thing that did surprise me is that we saw an increase in the magnet rare earth component of our mix, from 25% to 28%. Now, that 28% basically just comes to the bottom line, because that extra 3% is on the payable rare earths. Okay? That was a surprise to me. I didn't see that coming, but that's what's popped out of the analysis. So it's best in class at 28%. I've got to say, it is better than any other clay-hosted project in Australia on the amount of magnet rare earths in the composition of your rare earths. I'm very, very pleased about that. It goes straight to the bottom line, because that's the stuff you're looking for.
That's important, because a lot of people look at the big numbers, but the payable is the important one, because that's the money end of the business, right? So if you can get more payable, even though it's 3% or whatever, it makes a lot of difference.
You know what? I kind of had a look at the numbers, and the extra 3% from 25 to 28 of your magnet rare earths is about half of what your grade increase was, in terms of adding to potential revenue stream. It was 50% of the increase in overall grade. I mean, that was just, I thought, right, okay, so there's really a lot of gains to be made, and of course we're not in control of this, because it is what it is in the ground, but to have that happen, whilst we have an increase in grade, there's obviously a relationship there. We see an increase in grade, we see an increase in magnet rare earths. What I'm expecting to see is that our recoveries still stay very high in our next lot of leach test work. And if that's the case, then as I say, that extra 3% goes straight to the bottom line. Fantastic.
And I guess in some ways, not predicting, but once you've done one lot, it's very seldom do you see a big variability in, let's say, your recoveries and stuff. So that's first variability is pretty much on song. Most of the projects I've seen, very rare do I see something go haywire. I don't know.
Let's hope we're not the exception here.
Yes, there's always an exception.
Yeah, so, but yeah, you're right. Yeah, that's what you generally see. So, I've got some reasonable confidence that will hold up as we move forward.
Yeah. News
flow. I guess we've really touched on it insofar as the production of rare earth carbonate samples. That's around the end of the year. But that's progressing well in terms of process, which is good. But we haven't touched on some of our other projects. So a reminder for investors that we have our second project in the Northern Territory, Duke. We undertook a 450 sample soil program. In addition to that, I was up in Darwin a week and a half ago, where we looked at some holes that from 1979, believe it or not, and the good people at the Northern Territory Geological Survey helped preserve material through the regolith in an area that is roughly coincident with our soil survey, and those samples are in for assay right now. We did some PXRF work. We're very happy with what we saw in our PXRF data, but we're getting that validated in assay right now. So I'm expecting to see some results from both the soil survey and our analysis of the chips from the regolith above the Warrego granite in near Tennant Creek. Expecting to see that very, very shortly, and fingers crossed we'll get some good numbers out of that as well. So that's also coming up probably in the shorter term than the rare earth carbonate samples.
Before we conclude...
sorry, and there was one more thing. Sorry to interrupt.
No, that's okay.
Our exploration target, of course. We've still got to come up with an exploration target for Cowalinya. I'm expecting that to be in the next week or two. So that will give investors a good feel for what the capability of our ground is to host a very large amount of rare earths as the foundation for a development project.
Before we conclude, can you tell the viewers what they should be sort of looking for, why they should be looking at HRE, and what are the timelines required for them to, harvest the fruits from their investment?
Well, with any luck, we see more interest return to the rare earth sector from the investment market. It's, as you said earlier, I think it's a little bit on the nose at the moment. It's not the.
But it's not. It's every commodity.
It is. So I'm hopeful that we'll see a bit more optimism in the resources sector to be able to give people confidence to invest in not just HRE, but resources across the spectrum. So, having said that, when it comes to HRE, we've just demonstrated a substantial increase in resources. So I've got a lot more confidence, and that was just in 13 months since we listed, okay? It's funny, I was saying to someone the other day, we've just put a market announcement out there, but what it doesn't tell you is that there's been 13 months worth of very sustained effort to get to that point. So I think that investors can begin to now picture, hopefully, along with me, that we have the makings of a development pathway here. We need a large resource because we need large throughput through a plant to be able to make a reasonable amount of rare earths that someone will take notice of and potentially help fund, okay? So I think we're now seeing that at 160 odd million tonnes at 870 parts per million total rare earths. We're starting to see that now. With an exploration target to come, it'll give us the bigger picture, the potential bigger picture. Because I think in the end, projects of this description are going to need 1 billion odd tonnes to make a go of it. 500 million to 1 billion tonnes, that sort of order, to be able to sustain something at a 10 to 20 million tonne per annum throughput operation, okay? At the grades at which we're dealing with, which again I'll say is really double the grade of what we're putting out there in resource as a head grade, because the plant will see something that's almost double that, okay? So that's really the way investors ought to be thinking about these things. So I think that's really, really positive. And our metallurgical test work to date has been quite outstanding, to be honest. And I'm hopeful that we'll continue in a very, very positive way there, again, to demonstrate that we can produce something out of the ground that someone's prepared to buy.
I think it's good that we clear this up, is that the grade number is there, but at the end of the day, it's about a combination of the whole business.
It is.
And people tend to focus on points of, I call them flashiness, but it's not the critical part of the business.
I can understand that. Someone's got a grade of A, someone's got a grade of B, B's greater than A, B must be better than A. All right, well, to an extent that is the case, but you're right. You've got to look at the entire picture, including the processing, including the ability to sell product, how much of it is actually made up of, it's better to have a smaller head grade, depends on the numbers of course, a smaller head grade, but have 28% of that head grade being magnet rare earths than a higher head grade and having 18% of it being magnet rare earths, knowing that the only stuff that you're going to be able to sell is the 18 or 28% worth.
That's correct, yeah.
Right, so that's just one small difference that people need to take into consideration when they're trying to compare projects. And that's a small piece of advice I guess I give to people who are looking at projects in this space.
Look, it's a small piece of advice coming from a guy who's been in the industry for decades, 1 decade maybe. If I said more, they'll know how old you are. So, but, this is very important. That's why I'm hoping, with Samso platforms to give people this education and understanding from people who know the business. And I think it's important to flash these things out so that, you get the bigger picture rather than just what you see in the headlines. But Richard, thank you. Fantastic, as usual. And, you never leave empty-handed when you come to Samso. A couple of packets of coffee beans for yourself. And thanks Florence Drummond and an organisation called KIC, who are First Nations business in our industry. So, thank you. And we talk when you get your exploration target out.